Alliance Summit, and this is track 2. And in this session, we will be hearing from Karen and JR from the Pennsylvania Office of Victims Advocates. But just a few housekeeping tips before we get started. Please use the chat or the Q&A function to the right-hand side of your screen if you have any questions throughout the presentation, and we will get those answered for you after the presentation is over. If you would like to be unmuted and verbally ask your question, that's okay. Just use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen, and they will be able to unmute you and you can ask your question. We do have closed captioning available for this presentation, and you can enable that by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen. We also have ASL interpreters, Ashley and Sharon, and they will be providing the ASL interpretation for us throughout this hour-long session. With that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I introduce you to Karen and JR. And also a side note, some of the conversations that might be happening in this session could be difficult to hear. If you need assistance at any time, we do have someone available to provide that assistance. Katie and Tatiana are available. And if you need support in any way, just go ahead and type in the chat box, "I need support," and they have the capability to take you into a breakout room and provide any support that you might need. So we'll go ahead and get started. Karen and JR, take it away.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you, Rochelle. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Laird, and I am the training coordinator for the Office of Victim Advocate. I've been with this agency since 2003 and held numerous roles in our office, and now I am in charge of our training, both internal and external, and it's a pleasure for JR and I to be here with you today.
My name is JR Woltermeier. I am an advocate here at the Office of Victim Advocate and have been so for the last 8+ years. Prior to that, I was with the York County District Attorney's Office, where I spent about a little over a decade working with victims of crime on behalf of the District Attorney of York. I currently manage Pennsylvania's Address Confidentiality program, which we're going to talk about a little bit more this afternoon. I'm very happy to be with you today.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Please know that JR and I are very casual in our presentation, and we love conversation. So if anyone has questions, concerns, just needs clarification, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. Sorry, I'm trying. It was there before.
While Karen's searching, I'm going to take this time to mention that the platform that the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections and the Board of Probation and Parole typically use, the one that we're most familiar with, is unfortunately Zoom or Microsoft Teams. WebEx is one that we're not quite as familiar with. So please just bear with us a little bit as Karen gets her bearings. I beg your pardon.
And I apologize. My PowerPoint was just there, and now when I go to share it, it's not there anymore.
So as Karen's searching, I wanted to tell you what our thought process is in coming up with this piece of training today. One of the things that we thought about instantly upon looking at the topic of the Alliance's conference was this is something we do every single day in the Office of Victim Advocate with victims. We have to rebuild constantly and encourage growth. And so when we saw this, thought instantly that this was a great intersection of your skill set and knowledge and our skill set and knowledge. And we thought that it would be very important for us to come together and to just examine that intersection a little bit so we're all more comfortable with what each agency does. Okay. So that was the mindset that we went through in coming up with this information for you. I want you to understand this information is going to be fairly generic, simply because when we're speaking directly with a victim service agency, we of course are more specific because they have the same foundational background that we have. What we have done today is to try to make sure that this is palatable to a very wide range of people with a wide range of experiences. So if you would like any more specific information, we are available. We're going to provide you all of our contact information before we're finished here today. And if this conversation today specifically drums up questions that are related to your own victimization or to the victimization that's occurred in your family, and you want to speak to one of the two of us about that specifically, what I would encourage is that you reach out to either one of us when this is over in a more private manner, simply so that we don't, I don't want to divulge any information that you wouldn't want to have divulged in front of a large group. But we're more than happy to talk to you about your specific questions on a more individual role. Yay, Karen! Yay! Celebrate life's little victory! Yay!
Yes, we have to take those victories as they come because sometimes they don't always happen. So I apologize for that. Just a quick little note about our office. So the Office of Victim Advocate is a state agency with the duty and authority to advocate for the individual and collective rights of crime victims. And so one of the things we accomplish through our mission through victim services is post-sentencing notification of offender status and movement within both the Department of Corrections and the Pennsylvania Parole Board. We do a variety of restorative justice programs like our Inmate Apology Bank and programs that promote resiliency and healing. And we are currently developing new initiatives around crime prevention. So we do kind of dabble in a lot, but today we're going to identify some risks while living with an abuser to include during a pandemic, which also includes the typology of an abuser. We're going to be identifying safe ways to reach out for assistance to include accessibility while in lockdown, which unfortunately we've all kind of been subject to for the past year.
And maybe again.
Yep, and maybe again soon. Recognizing some signs of abuse in family or friends and ways to offer support. This one is huge, understanding the importance of collaboration with local and state resources to ensure victim and community safety, and understanding the Address Confidentiality Program, which JR oversees, as another tool in a comprehensive safety plan. JR and I love this visual because I think it's an easy visual to look at, but it says so much. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy of an abusive relationship.
You know, Karen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that I want to point out to the group is that the reason that we love this slide so much, everybody understands the physically abusive part of an abusive relationship. The problem is, I believe that TV and the sensationalism of media these days has kind of encouraged us to believe that abusive relationship is solely abusive in the physical realm. And one of the things I love to point out to people in here is if you look at all the different red dots, there's only one or two of those that are actually physical at all. Everything else on that page in front of you is emotional, mental, financial. It's not physical. It doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't leave scars. So the first thing to learn right off the bat here from us today is that abuse has a lot of faces and only a couple of them leave scars. And we're going to talk a little more about that. Sorry, Karen. Thank you.
No, absolutely. So we're going to start with quick romance. Many survivors of domestic violence will tell us that they had a very quick whirlwind romance with the abuser. That's not uncommon at all. Things move very quickly. You can move from dating to moving into marriage in the span of a couple months. And that kind of, you know, they one of the words, the resounding words that we hear many victims say is that their abuser was very charming. And why wouldn't they be? You know, if they were not charming and they were not a stand-up person and they were not, you know, well-known in the community, people wouldn't want to be with them. And so I think that's the first misnomer right there. Everyone says, why would you get in a relationship with someone that's violent? Well, they're not violent right away. They're not abusive right away. They're not emotionally abusive right away. They are Prince Charming. And I'm saying he just simply because of statistics, many abusers are male. Understanding that females can also abuse.
So in terms of that quick romance, I really want to harp on a point here with Karen. Charming. It is the most common characteristic of an abuser. They are the most charming and manipulative people in the world. Mm-hmm. Understand what this slide demonstrates. The violence is itself a byproduct. When these other tactics, things like reproductive control and jealousy and isolation, when these things don't work, the offender has to resort to the violence because that's the only other coping mechanism he has. And so when we talk about things like a quick romance, I want you to understand that charm aspect that Karen brought up. If abusers, if it was like a Webster book, and we could just walk around with abusers having labels, that would be so much easier. The problem is that abusers look like the rest of us, and they are very charming. And so rather than walk up to you on first date and be violent to you and say, "You're my girl now," they tell you that you're the love of their life, that you are the most beautiful woman they've ever seen, that they can't imagine life without you. I think my favorite line so far was, "If the sky or the ocean were of ink and the sky were of parchment, I could write a portion of my love for you." Was actually said to somebody on a second date, one of my former clients. It's that kind of quick romance that inundates you in charm that kind of disarms you, and that's where that leads. Thank you again for the interruption, Karen. Sorry.
You can interrupt whenever you want. Very similar to that quick romance is vulnerability. Oftentimes they're going to target single moms who have, children to care for and are looking for a significant other, thinking that no one would want them. They're going to look for people that have a history of abuse, whether physical or sexual abuse. They're going to look for people that just got out of a relationship and maybe their esteem is not where it should be. So they're kind of preying on that vulnerability. And then the jealousy tactic, so many people look at that jealousy as flattering. Wow, they must really care for me because they don't want me talking to anybody else and they always want to be with me and they're always checking in on me multiple times throughout the day to let me know, ask me where I am and make sure I'm safe. Well, that all sounds all well and good, but that's a control tactic. And that jealousy isn't the jealousy of care and concern. It's the jealousy of I want to know exactly where you are and what you're doing at all times. And that leads to emotional abuse. And emotional abuse, you hear name calling you fat, calling you a slob, saying no one would ever want you. Those start off slow and they really ramp up to the fact, if you're told you're nothing day in and day out and you're told that you're unattractive and you're worthless, you're going to start to believe it. And this next one really, I think, hit home during the pandemic, which is isolation. They want to be the beginning and end of their victim's entire world. They want you to be completely and totally dependent upon them. And so they want to isolate you from your family and your friends, anyone who would take your attention away from them. And the sad part is that during this past year in the pandemic, isolation was so easy to do because we were all isolated. You're stuck in a house with somebody who is emotionally, abusive, could be physically abusive. And even more so than not, people don't know because everybody else is locked in their household as well. And that's why domestic violence rates have soared through this pandemic. So many people are without resources and without support. And again, because they're isolated, you can't go to restaurants, you can't go out in public a lot. They've really been confined to their home, which is one of the most dangerous places for a victim of domestic violence to be isolated to.
Yeah, I think I said the last training that I did, I mentioned this topic of isolation. It is absolutely the best friend of an abuser. Abusers have accomplished isolation to a level that they never before dreamed of it during COVID. Because by definition, we were in lockdown. We were supposed to be stay home. We were already masking, and so people couldn't see faces. The isolation that has occurred for all of us has taken a toll on our mental health. Now, when you think about domestic violence victims, that has trebled or quadrupled or even further escalated because this is the number one tactic. If I isolate you from the rest of your world, number one, you don't know how bad you have it, but more importantly, perhaps the rest of the world also doesn't know how bad you have it. And so isolation, this has been the greatest friend to abusers, has been the pandemic and the isolation that's resulted from it. I love the fact that that's something we have to deal with today because I think it's particularly relevant to our discussion today of how the pandemic has kind of encroached on all of our worlds. It has been the best friend of an abuser, man. So that isolation, these things yield some things to an abuser. It begins to yield control. Karen mentioned the quick romance. I want to talk to you about control in a minute. it is really vital to understand that this relationship does not start out abusive. I said it a few moments ago, it bears to hear it again. It does not start out as an abusive relationship most of the time. So it begins very subtly. And then that control is usually cemented in the mind of the offender with, I usually refer to it as a catalyst or a switch that gets flicked. A lot of times it's you get pregnant, or you begin sharing finances, or you get married, or you move in together. David Adams, who's a very famous researcher who has investigated why men commit domestic violence homicides, believes that it's sex. The moment that you have sexual intercourse with somebody with an abuser, it is a trigger for him that indicates that I now have that person under my control. They're my property, because sex for them denotes ownership. Okay, so whether or not that is the case, and I do believe it probably is, I do believe that there is a catalyst, whether it's sex or pregnancy or moving in together or sharing finances or getting married. That's a concrete understanding for him that I now am in control. Okay, so what does that yield? Well, there's a bunch of different things that come out of that control. The first and foremost one is you're going to see reproductive control. He wants to get pregnant, it's time to get pregnant. And that would include sabotaging, taking away your pills, poking holes in condoms. Okay, reproductive control doesn't just necessarily imply forcing things like rape or forcing things like abortion. It could also simply be trying to increase the chances of an unwanted pregnancy. And then once that pregnancy is there, not allowing the victim to mitigate it in any way, shape, or form that they desire. Not having basic control over your body. Okay. So let's talk next about the physical abuse. This is the one that everybody likes to talk about because it's the one everybody recognizes. So I want to talk to you about the physical abuse. I mentioned it before, it's a byproduct. Abusers don't necessarily like to be violent. It's really simple why. What they like is control. And if I am violent to you, the chances of me being removed from that equation are great. If I leave bruises, if I leave scratches, if I leave scrapes, if I put you in the hospital, there's going to be documentation. And if I'm put in prison, I lose control over you to some degree. Physical abuse is, generally speaking, by an abuser done behind a closed door with no other witnesses except maybe kids. And it's usually only done when they believe they have no other option available to them. Most abusers, after the first incident of abuse, of true physical abuse, only have to give you the hairy eyeball. Because you as a victim, you know what that eyeball means, particularly when you get home behind closed doors. So remember that the physical abuse, we all expect to see it because Law and Order shows us that all the time, right? And it doesn't happen like that most of the time. One of the other things that I like to point out here is that physical abuse, they get really good at hiding this. You know, we expect a story of, oh yeah, I fell, I got a black eye, I hit a doorknob with my eye. That doesn't happen, man. It really doesn't happen very often. Abusers are smarter than that. They put the bruises where we're not going to look. Behind clothing, or on the scalp. Unless you're bald like I am, for the most part, bruises on your scalp, you don't see them unless you're a hairdresser. This is one of the reasons why we have hairdressers now that are being trained to spot incidents of domestic violence. I think we talk further about that later on. So remember, the physical abuse, we don't get to see it very often. And it's a byproduct. It's only when that control is being challenged by the victim that the offender feels a need to reassert that authority. Okay? So we've got threats listed there. I want you to understand something about threats. Threats are a rehearsal. Before we do something that we know is absolutely wrong and contrary to our upbringing, or contrary to the law, or the norms of society, whatever you want to call it, we have to first rehearse that. Threats are a rehearsal of what I intend to do to you. If you're living in a situation where you're being delivered threats and you don't believe them, shame on you, man. My belief is real simple. Somebody who's willing to say that they're going to do something like harm me or kill me, I'm going to take them at face value. If they choose not to act on that threat, then that's on them. But if I choose not to act on it and I get hurt, of course, that falls on me. I will always encourage clients and the rest of us, take threats seriously. They are a rehearsal to behavior. Before we can do a behavior, we first have to talk ourselves into doing it. That thread is that rehearsal. Right? So please be very aware of threats. These threats may not be physically violent threats. Offenders are great at threatening. Go ahead, leave me. I have a job, you don't. I'll take the kids. I can get an attorney. Go ahead and leave. You haven't worked in 20 years. How are you going to make ends meet? These threats don't have to be a physical thing. Okay? Pregnancy. It may shock you. It should shock you. It should definitely offend you. The number one killer, pregnant women. Abuse. The number one killer of a pregnant woman is an abuser. And for most, not all, but for a lot of victims, that abuse is the first time. So if you have clients and you're in the home and you see one is pregnant, just be extra aware. Pregnancy brings its own variety of lethality to the table to a domestic violence situation. Okay?
Okay. Now we're going to talk about identifying abuse in others. Oftentimes we see signs from family and friends, and we're like, oh, it's nothing. But those little subtle signs you really have to pay close attention to. So the first one is their partner puts them down in front of other people. If you're in a loving relationship with somebody, putting somebody down shouldn't be happening on a regular basis. It's great to joke and it's great to have fun, but when the only things that come out of that person's mouth are, oh, well, yeah, I'm sorry, dinner didn't taste good. She never cooks well. Or, oh, I'm sorry, she doesn't keep the house clean enough. Or, oh, my pants are wrinkled because she didn't get to iron them. When that's all you're hearing constantly from somebody and it's never anything positive or anything uplifting, pay attention to that. Though again, those put downs don't have to be anything to raise a red flag initially, but uh it's the constant put downs. It's not just one or two, it's everything that comes out of their mouth is somehow putting that person down in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, with this list, I want to definitely reinforce what Karen just said. Seeing one of these things at one point in time is not necessarily a huge red flag. But if you see one of them constantly, or you see a number of them over and over, then yeah, I think that we have a pattern of behavior, and it's something that we may need to explore a little further. Okay. The next one, constant worrying about making partners angry. Look, we all do this from time to time, and it's okay and normal. I joke around an awful lot because in my line of work, humor is my only defense mechanism. I'm either laughing or crying, and I cry enough during my day, trust me. I like to laugh. So one of the things that I usually will say when I bring this up is happy wife, happy life. Who hasn't heard that, right? I want you to understand that in our lines of work, we don't get to see the physical abuse as often. But when you're talking with a client, if the only thing they can express to you is that they're worried about the impact on the other person's behavior, the impact on the other person's emotional state, they're worried about making their partner angry, that for me is a pretty big red flag. My wife, I'm sure she doesn't try to make me angry. I also am pretty sure that she doesn't sit there and stress about it, because she knows that if I'm angry, we're going to have a discussion. We're going to try to figure this out like rational, reasonable adults. I think that excessive worry, that constant worry, that's indicative of something a little bit more malign.
Absolutely. They make excuses for their partner's behavior. That's another red flag. If you're finding that anytime you have your partner out in public, the rare times that you may, and they are either drinking to excess, yelling, they're rude, they're crass, they're inappropriate, and you're constantly saying, oh, I'm sorry. And then you try to rationalize it by saying, I'm sorry, he hasn't gotten a lot of sleep, or he's really stressed because of work, or he just had a bad day. When you're finding that you're making those excuses over and over and over again, and you're never having any kind of normal interaction with yourself and your partner and others, and you constantly feel the need that you're almost embarrassed by the way that your partner is behaving, that's a huge red flag. Again, everyone's entitled to a bad day. Everyone has those moments, but when those moments are the only moments that the individual has, that's a definite red flag.
Yeah, and the excuses for the partner's behavior, we're talking about things like a lot of times I hear, well, he's got mental health issues. Okay, I understand that. No, he's got substance abuse issues. Okay, I understand that. Um, if he knows those things and he's not addressing them, isn't he then by default choosing to still behave this way? I don't know about the rest of you, but if I have a problem, I'm a big fan of tackling it head on. If I have a substance abuse problem, you can bet your rear end that I'd be getting some help for it because I firmly believe in it. We're talking about making excuses for somebody else's behavior. Oh, he wouldn't have hit me if he hadn't been drinking that night. And just for the record, he's going to make the same excuses if you send him to treatment because they all say that. Oh, if it hadn't been for the alcohol, I would have never done that. It's just that whiskey, it makes me crazy. Well, I've been through treatment because when I worked in the court system in York, I never recommended a program that I didn't at least see the surface of. So I've been through some batters intervention classes. I've gotten to see some drug and alcohol classes. I was sitting in a batters intervention class one time when a man was trying to deflect his behavior because of alcohol, and he said if I hadn't been drunk that night, man. And the person who was running the group was masterful. He looked at this offender in front of the group and me and said, do you know you get like that when you drink whiskey? You do. So you knew when you took that first shot of whiskey that it could end up with you acting this way. Is that correct? Okay, so whose behavior is this? It's yours. And then the second thing he said was, and please forgive me, this is a little ew, but it is what it is. He looked at the abuser and said, oh, so alcohol causes your behavior. How many drinks would you have to French kiss your grandmother? And the offender was like, ew, I would never do that. And he said, so you were in control of your behavior. You can control your behavior even when you're drinking. And that kind of sunk in, not only hopefully for the offender, but it definitely sunk in for me. Ownership of this behavior is very important. And so when you see excuses coming either from a partner or from the person who's committing the acts themselves, see them for what they are, okay? We did talk about jealousy. I'm not going to harp on this point a whole lot. You know when I see this the most? These days, I see this more often with adolescents and early adult relationships than I see it in almost any other. And these days, I'm 49 now. I've been out of high school for over 30 years. And I know that makes me incredibly old. Please understand that I feel it every day. But the reason I bring that up is because I don't remember jealousy being a red badge of courage when I was in high school. I can tell you my wife, who I did not date in high school, I began dating her in college. She would never have tolerated jealousy or extreme possessiveness. It's just not the way that it works. A little bit of jealousy, I think, is like seasoning in a soup. A little bit makes it perfect because let's face it, we're all a little jealous at times. We see somebody paying attention to the person that we love the most, or we see them paying attention to somebody else, and it sparks that instant thought in us like, oh man. But most of us recognize it for what it is and stop it. With an offender, that's when the self-injurious pattern of speaking begins. Well, she shouldn't treat me like this. She should have more respect than be talking to another man when I'm in her presence. She should have more respect than to dance with another man when we're at a wedding together. And then he begins telling himself he doesn't deserve this treatment, and next thing you know, he's justifying what he's going to do to her later on tonight. Okay, so we're talking about extreme jealousy, extreme possessiveness. Not just, well, okay, he got a little upset when my ex-boyfriend kissed me. So this is an extreme version of those things, okay?
Unexplained marks or injuries, as JR and I both said, those are rare because the second an abuser puts a mark on you, they're shining a big spotlight on themselves at saying, I was violent with this person. Does it happen? Yes. Does it happen to the extent that I think the general public thinks? No. However, if you're noticing that it's 80 degrees outside and somebody has long sleeves on, and this doesn't just have to be with in an intimate partner relationship, child abuse is much like this too. If you're noticing that anyone is having to cover parts of their body and their clothing is not in line with the temperature outside, if you're noticing that somebody all of a sudden has a different hairstyle or a different haircut, If you're noticing that, oh, they're wearing sunglasses because they say they have a migraine. Do they have a migraine? Is there a black eye underneath? So it's really important just when you notice those marks and injuries. Could it be something very simple? I'm clumsy. I've done it before. Absolutely. But it's always best to check in and just make sure. And if you're noticing that they're falling down the steps or they're hitting themselves on the corner of the table more often than not, that's your red flag. It's not so much an unexplained mark or injury, it's the repetitiveness of that. They're constantly coming with marks and injuries or something that's with no justification as to why.
So the next one is summed up in a single word. And if you remember from our last slide, it's isolation. In order to normalize my behavior as an abuser, I've got to keep you away from everybody who could tell you how very unnormal my behavior really is. And primarily for most of us, our support systems tend to be friends and family. I remember there was a domestic violence homicide that I was involved in when I worked at the DA's office in York. And this woman was, and by the way, this is public record, so I'm not divulging anything confidential. I want to make that very clear. This woman was from a very affluent family. She was a ballet dancer. She went to a private college for dance and landed a job right out of college with a very high-paid firm designing dance and swimsuit apparel for the Olympics. Then she met him. 2 years later, she hadn't had contact with her mom and dad, who she spoke with every day prior to this. She hadn't had contact with them in over 6 months. She had quit her job because he forced her to. And she was working part-time in the pizza shop he managed because then he could always watch her. Before there was a job available at the pizza store, he made her show up and volunteer her labor because that's the only way he could watch her during the day. She wasn't allowed to talk to customers. She wasn't allowed to talk to friends. She had no friends. She wasn't allowed to talk to her family unless they showed up. She was absolutely isolated in a society where she was surrounded by people. So when you see people drop off the face of the planet after they meet somebody, for me, that's a huge red flag.
This last one is a little bit difficult to gauge. They are depressed or anxious, or you notice changes in their personality. Let's be honest. I think at one time or another, all of us had some depression and anxiety surrounding COVID. When you're used to going and doing and having a normal routine, and all of a sudden everything comes to a halt and your day-to-day life is different. For those of you that have children, your children are now home. You could be now home and you're not able to come and go as you please as easily. All the things that kept you busy and running have ceased. And so it's very easy to see that depression and anxiety in a pandemic. However, if you notice that it is above and beyond the normal anxiety and depression that people feel, and the frustration of being in isolation and being locked down and not having a normal routine. The key, I think, to all of this, identifying abuse in others, because it's so hard to do. It's hard to see it in other people and to know when to intervene. A victim of domestic violence is going to decide to leave their abuser when they decide. And for some people, that's extremely frustrating because you may call them out on every single one of these and say, hey, I've noticed he's very possessive. Hey, I've noticed that you're making excuses. Hey, I've noticed that he just puts you down all the time and that you're not, with anyone else. And as caring humans, we want them to get out of that situation so that they're safe. Well, they're not just going to pick up and leave. And so for us and for family and friends, that's going to be very frustrating to us. The key with all of this is to not drop communication with that victim. Because even if you say the same thing for a solid year, maybe the next month is when they're going to hear you and they're going to need your support and they're going to reach out and say, you know what, I need help. I need to get out of this. I can't stress that enough. I think so many people get frustrated because they're not taking the advice that you're giving, and they just say, oh, well, if they want to stay in that relationship, they're going to stay. There's nothing I can do about it. We don't know everything that goes on behind closed doors. So the best thing we can do when we identify an abusive situation in our loved ones is to be there unconditionally, whether it's for a day, a week, a year, or 10 years. Be that support so they know they can pick up the phone and call you at any time and reach out when they're truly ready to leave.
To tag on to that one, that last statement there, depressed or anxious, I want you to understand something, pandemic or not. Now, I realize I'm an old school hippie and I believe in helping people, and I know how pathetic I am. But let me just tell you, I don't care if it's a coworker, I don't care if it's a male or female, I don't care if it's a family member or friend, or even to some degree an enemy. If I see somebody who's depressed or anxious, I'm going to ask them about it. That's how we demonstrate concern for one another. It's okay. And you can ask Karen. We walk around this office together, went before COVID, of course. It was not uncommon to see me walk up and say, hey, it's great to see you this morning. Hey, are you okay? Because that's just who I am. If I see particularly somebody I care about hurting, I ask them, why are you hurting? How can I help you? That's what I'm going to encourage you to do. As Karen said, it's frustrating. Helping other people is frustrating because you don't do it on your timeline, you do it on theirs. And their timeline sometimes is not rational or reasonable to us. But the reason it's not rational or reasonable is for reasons that are often beyond our reach and could very well be saving the life of the victim. So to piggyback on Karen, just make sure they're there. You're there. Reinforce it for them. I understand you don't want to talk about it now, and that's okay. I want you to know that I'm here for you. I love you, and if you need anything, you can always talk to me, and I promise you, no judgment. Because that's the most important thing I can add to that. You need to be completely non-judgmental, even of the offender to some degree, because she already knows what kind of a jerk he can be. We don't need to reinforce that and to make her feel like she's got to defend him. To listen, and when appropriate, try to help them find the resources like us.
We found this on Rain's website, and I love it. And I love that when it says how to intervene, I love that the acronym is CARE, because that's really what you're doing. When you're trying to intervene to stop something from happening, it's because you care. So creating a distraction, ask directly, refer to an authority, and enlist others. And we're going to briefly go through each one of these.
And you know what's really sad about all this? We had to come up with this acronym. Rain had to come up with this acronym because too many people weren't getting involved. Places like New York had to pass bystander intervention laws, forcing people to get involved. Look, I'm not asking you to put your own safety at risk to save somebody else that you don't know. But I'm certainly saying these things that we're going to talk about here will at least draw attention to the fact that there might be an issue and will help to underline for the victim that people outside of the situation see it and care. And I think that's what's important.
Yeah, creating a distraction is huge. And it could be something very subtle. It can be something that you're out and about at a party and you see two people that look like they may be arguing. You might see the one person is extremely upset. And it may just be going up and introducing yourself. Hey, oh, I thought you were somebody else. So how are things going? Because really what you're just doing is you're interrupting that moment. You're interrupting that moment for long enough that hopefully if there was some kind of violence about to occur, that you're pausing it and giving the victim the ability to move away from that. It could be being out, let's be honest, I mean, a lot of young adults, they go out to bars or clubs. It could be watching your friend at the bar and noticing an individual come over and put something in their drink. Or it could not be your friend. You could just be at one of those establishments and see somebody putting something in someone's drink, knowing that that's not the person that they're with, and going over and saying, hey, I think I saw a fly land in your drink, or I saw some dirt get in your drink. Let's get you a new one. I don't know if you want to drink that. It's just diverting, creating that distraction to divert that tension away from what's happening. JR, did you have anything else to add for that?
I like what you said.
Okay.
So I think this is the most important thing. Ask. Now, my coworkers, Karen included, will tell you I'm like an 8-year-old on 3 cans of Jolt Cola. I can't sit still and I ask a million questions. My grandmother always told me, and still does tell me, because thankfully she is still around. She still tells me to this day, the answer to every unasked question is no. So I have been trained over my life to ask questions, and there are no questions I won't ask. So if you see something going on and you're not comfortable with what you saw, ask. I love questions like, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help you? Would you like me just to stay? I think that these are all things that demonstrate that we care, even though we don't know who you are, and especially if we know who you are. So ask, be direct. I would beware of asking questions that are loaded. Is he abusing you? It's up to interpretation, and I don't think that she's likely to be truthful, particularly if it could possibly impact her ability to remain safe for the rest of the night when you're not there. So I prefer open-ended questions like, there's something we can do to help. Okay?
Refer to an authority. I think this is something that it seems simplistic and for some people, and for others it seems foreign, but get them help. If you're out somewhere and you see something, it always amazes me when things pop up on the internet, or you'll see there's violence occurring, whether it is violence of there's a fight going on or there's somebody being attacked. And people would rather stand and have their phones out and be recording it while cheering it on rather than either intervening to stop it or calling the authorities to get help. That always, it makes me sad sometimes for our human race that we care more about recording it to upload it to YouTube than we do to actually intervene. But if you're out and about, even if you don't know the person, if you have concerns and you're concerned for their safety, go and find a security guard or a police officer. If you're in a bar, find the bartender. Maybe they know of a police officer that's close by. Alert somebody else. Do not carry that burden all on yourself, especially if you don't know the individual. But the more people that are made aware of what the situation could be, the more people are watching that situation and can intervene in the right moment. And make sure it's somebody that's a neutral party. You know, as much as it's great to get their friends, if there's friends there, but again, as JR and I mentioned, in domestic violence situations, it's very unlikely that they're going to be with their friends. They're most likely just going to be the two of them out. So you're not going to be able to get somebody who knows either one of them. So that's where that neutral party comes in, a security officer, a bartender, an employee, just somebody to help. And when all else fails, if you have concerns for someone's safety, call 911. That's what they're there for.
So enlist others, this goes without saying. Numbers are our best security. Having a lot of people there not only increases the number of adult witnesses that see an incident that occurs, but more importantly, the offender is much less likely to do anything because he knows, number one, there are all these witnesses here, and number two, he knows these other people could intervene at any point in time. Okay, so I love enlisting others. I don't think that it's a bad thing. Find her friends if you can, if she has any. At present at that event. If not, as Karen said, find somebody who's in charge, a bartender, a bouncer, a teacher, a principal, if it's at a school or at a high school football game or something. Just find somebody in a position of authority who has at least some role in maintaining security. They're going to help you, trust me. So in coming up with what we're doing here today, Karen and I wanted to look at victim services as a whole. And we wanted to figure out ways that not only in the past that we have encouraged victims to seek services in safer manners, but how has that increased these days? So some of these things we're going to talk about are things that we have done for a really long period of time in victim services because we know that we have to operate under the guise of safety, security, and sometimes secrecy. So when we talk about things like escape buttons, our website, the website for Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, RAIN, pretty much every domestic violence or sexual assault based web service out there is going to have an escape button. And what that does is we know that offenders are going to look over your shoulder to make sure that you're not doing things like figuring out where the local shelter is. And so those websites have an escape button, and you just click on. And the minute you click on it, it immediately clears not only that from your website, but I believe that some of them actually will take it right out of your browser as well. So that it doesn't even leave a trail. It doesn't even look like you were visiting that website. So be aware of those things. Make sure that you're utilizing them if you need to. Make sure that if you are referring somebody to our website or PCAR's website or RAIN's website, please make sure that you're notifying them or making them aware of the fact that it does have escape buttons for safety.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about this a little bit with collaboration, but agencies like PCADV, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and PCAR, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, they have amazing websites that are full of information. Utilize that information. They also have crisis hotlines that are manned 24/7. So if you have a victim that's in crisis and needs to speak to somebody right then and there, those are wonderful resources to use. They're going to get somebody. You want them to get somebody on the phone because it takes a lot of courage for someone to actually decide to make that first initial call. So when they do, you want to make sure they're talking to somebody and they're talking to somebody in real time that can help them.
So a great way to seek services in terms of sexual assault, domestic violence, and any other victimization here in Pennsylvania is we have a county map on our website. If you are on our website and you identify your county of residence or the county where you're seeking services, we have a complete listing of victim service providers that have reached out to us to identify themselves as victim service providers in each county. All 67 counties of Pennsylvania have at least 2 providers listed. And so anytime somebody's seeking services in any of the counties in Pennsylvania, the very worst that you could do is to send them to the Office of Victim Advocate website. And there they'll be able to seek services or resources, and they'll find our county map. They identify their county of residence, and it automatically gives them a great big listing of each agency, the services they provide, and then contact information for those agencies.
Absolutely. Shoe cards. This is by far one of my favorites. Shoe cards are tiny, tiny cards, and they're shoe cards because the idea is that they can fit in your shoe. It's information about victim service agencies, domestic violence agencies, sexual assault agencies. If you want a victim, especially a victim that's scared to get resources, you don't want to hand them a big giant pamphlet. You want to hand them something small that they can easily conceal. So if they are going back into a residence with their abuser, that they can hide it someplace like their shoe where their abuser is not going to look. A big pamphlet, a big booklet, things like that are not conducive for them to hide. Doctor's offices are great. In fact, I told JR when I first moved to Pennsylvania, one of the reasons why I chose my GYN is when I went for my first visit, not only did they ask me very direct questions about if I was safe and about relationships, but in the bathroom, it had cards for domestic violence services. And again, they were tiny, which I thought was great. Hair salons are also starting to carry them. As JR said, hairstylists are being trained more than ever regarding domestic violence, since a lot of abusers use the head and the scalp area to leave marks and to abuse. So those shoe cards, while they just seem tiny and little, that can be a lifesaver to somebody. The key is they need to be small enough to conceal.
And one of the things I have absolutely loved during the pandemic, because this was one of my chief concerns when this all kicked off and we started with lockdowns and closures. How do we seek services? How is it that our clients are seeking services? And equally important, how are offenders finding things like batterers intervention if we're all locked down? And so when we discovered that things like virtual therapy and virtual support groups were being offered and being encouraged, I absolutely fell in love with the idea. I think that making it as easy as possible to seek and receive services and assistance with our mental health and with our ability to remain violence free, I think that providing that support has been paramount to saving lives. I really can't stress that enough. I think that last item that we have listed there has saved lives during the pandemic, and I think it will continue to do so. I just think it really is that big of a deal. So definitely encourage your clients that they need, in the same way that he needs healing, in the same way that he needs some intervention to stop battering, the vulnerabilities that made her particularly susceptible to his charm, manipulation, and ultimately to his physical violence. Those are things that she needs to, that the client, our victim, will need to put work into in order to avoid repeating this mistake again. In other words, I don't want to call it a mistake because that blames her, but in order to repeat this relationship and to find another abuser, we have to first make sure that we're not demonstrating that vulnerability that offenders just find like blood in the water for a shark. Having virtual therapy and support groups is not only important to offenders who need to grow and to become non-abusive and non-controlling, but I think it's also important to our clientele as they move forward with their own healing and hopefully ultimately away from their abusers.
I love this next slide. Again, very simplistic, but I think it speaks volumes. Collaboration is a must. We cannot do this work and work with the clientele of domestic violence victims, victims of sexual assault, without collaborating, without starting with our local domestic violence and sexual assault programs, who are really our boots on the ground. I know without a doubt at OVA, since we provide a lot of post-sentencing notifications to our victims, when we're working with a victim and we're doing safety planning with them because their offender's about to be released, sure, we're going to hit all the basic things, but we are going to absolutely make sure that we refer that victim back to their local community domestic violence program for a lot of reasons. We're based in Harrisburg. If our victim is calling from Erie, I don't know Erie well enough to do any comprehensive safety planning, but you know who does? The local domestic violence advocates in Erie County. So we want to make sure that they're connected so they can provide, hey, this is where the shelter is. This is what your non-emergency police number is. These are all the services that are available in Erie County. We want them to stay connected with us. We also want to make sure that they stay connected with their local domestic violence program, and the same for sexual assault. It really flows best when we're all working together. We all take what our expertise is and provide it to that victim so they have an entire, really just toolkit for their safety planning that encompasses both local, state, federal, if need be, out of state. And in the same sense, things like JR and I do right now, doing training anyone that'll listen to us, whether they're in this field or not, regarding domestic violence and sexual assault. You know, my oldest daughter is about to start high school. I have one in middle school. And as JR said, teen dating violence has really ramped up. And so even talking to schools and educators, anybody who will listen to prevent somebody from that is so incredibly important.
So in preparing for this, one of the things I played around with a little bit and was very unsuccessful at, I'm not afraid to admit it. I love this slide, but I want those arrows to not only point in one direction, I want them to point the opposite direction, and I want them to point across the center to each other and back. Because what I want you to understand is that when we are all connected, when each of those different bubbles, plus all the other bubbles that exist that aren't on that page, when we're all interconnected, what it really forms is a web. And that web is the safety net that is going to catch our client before they fall to the ground. I know it's a cliche. Please forgive me. I tend not to be a cliche kind of guy. But I think that this is one that actually kind of bears out. I love the imagery because that's what we're really doing when we collaborate. We're kind of interlocking our hands so that very few things can fall through those cracks. And that's important because the thing that falls through the cracks in our line of work, well, they're human beings. And if they fall through the cracks, unfortunately, it usually means that they're in harm's way or worse. Okay, so I love this, and I think that collaboration and networking is the most important reason we're here today. That's why I wanted to meet all of you and why I wanted you to meet all of us. You now have an ally in this field. I want to have an ally in your field as well, because I'm going to need you at some point, or my clients are going to need you, more importantly. And when they need you, I'm going to reach out and try to make an introduction for them. Okay, do the same for me, please. Use me. How's that? Okay, so last up, I want to talk to you about the address confidentiality program, because this is something we concretely do to encourage safety each and every day in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and even indeed outside of PA. So what is it? The ACP is really simple. We provide a substitute. We are state law, for the record. This is not some pie in the sky dream that some community agency came up with and everybody just started to follow. We are Pennsylvania state law. You have no choice but following ACP law. Should you choose not to do so, you're breaking the law no different than the offenders that we deal with every day who are in state prison. Okay? So it provides a substitute legal address. It's a post office box here in Harrisburg. All first-class mail that comes to us in the name of a client gets forwarded. And it is required to be used by all state and local government entities as the address of record, meaning that people who are in the ACP are the only people in Pennsylvania who are allowed to have only a post office box on their driver's license. Cops aren't allowed to do that. Judges aren't allowed to do that. The governor is not allowed to do that. People in the ACP are allowed to have only a post office box on their driver's license because the ACP law says so. There are a lot of other avenues in the daily living that we touch upon with clients. For more specific information about the ACP, I would love to talk to all of you. Please call me, email me, write me. Hell, figure it out and we'll stop in and talk. Well, after COVID, of course. But the ACP is my passion, and it's absolutely, and I'm not saying it because it's my passion. I'm saying it because even as an advocate at the local level, I recognize the need for this tool and the use of this tool. This program is vitally important to the safety of some clients, I swear to you. So what are we not? We're not witness protection. I can't give you a new face, a new address, a new social security number, a new job in some other locale somewhere. My budget is effectively zero. All of our postage costs are very graciously covered by the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections Board of Probation and Parole. If it weren't for them, we would have to probably hold our hats out in our hands, beg for money. Thankfully, we don't. But as a result, I can't relocate you. Okay? What I can do is protect your residential address when you're here in Pennsylvania. We don't relocate. I have no relocation budget. I'm really sick about that. It makes me horribly sad, but it's not anything I'm going to be able to change. I once had a client one time, and I'm throwing this out there to the group because if you can make this happen, make it happen. I had a client one time say, what about a GoFundMe page for relocation for domestic violence victims? I absolutely love it. There's a million logistical questions that have to be answered, but if there's somebody out there that can take this dream and make it a reality, please feel free to call upon me to help do the work. I'd be happy to help you. Okay? So we want to leave you with a bunch of resources besides the ACP. First and foremost is a resource that we understand best, us. If you have questions, concerns, problems about anything we've talked about so far today, if you have a client who has an offender in state prison or on state parole or state probation, reach out to us. The number is listed there along with our website. If you're interested in more specific information about the ACP, ask for me. I'd be happy to talk to you or your client at any point in time as long as you want. And frankly, my boss, Miss Estrella, who's the victim advocate, she sends me the whole way across the state to do trainings like the one we're doing with you right now. So if your agency wants a specific training on ACP, call me. Karen and I will make arrangements, and I'll get out there and bore you for another half hour. So we're listed up there. Please feel free to reach out to us at any point in time.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I know we don't have much time left. Does anyone have any questions? JR and I will put our information in the chat so that you were able to see that. And if you have questions that we did not answer, please, I know that we had to go pretty fast, but please email us if there's anything we can do. Any questions we have. I saw some things are in the chat, and I apologize that I couldn't see them because I was sharing my screen, but both of our email addresses will be there. Please, please, please reach out with any questions you have if there's anything we can do to help. And for those of you that are in the audience that are doing the such needed and wonderful work that we're all doing to make our communities better and safer, thank you. And hopefully JR and I will have the privilege and the honor of working with you all.
Yeah, having done local work, having worked at the local level for, I believe, 11 total years, I do want to thank you. I know what you do on a regular basis, and I am not so far along removed from those times that I don't remember the anxiety, the sleepless nights, and the feeling like I was constantly overworked and underpaid. trust me, working at the state level doesn't really change that so much. Maybe a little bit. But as Karen mentioned, I want to thank you so much for what you do on a daily basis. Certainly I couldn't do it without you, and I don't know that our clients would be nearly so safe without some of you or all of you. So thank you all very much for what you do on a regular basis. My information is posted up there for you. The 800 number is the office 800 number. The 717 number is my Commonwealth provided cell phone. It goes directly to me. And then my email address is listed as well. Simply because my job is fairly demanding in terms of phone time. Sometimes it's a little easier if you shoot me an email, and then we can make some arrangements to have a conversation when I know that I won't specifically be talking to another client that day.
Okay, thank you very much, JR and Karen, for your time. The presentation was absolutely wonderful and very informative, and we really appreciate you guys coming out this afternoon and presenting to our group. And just a quick note for everybody in our audience, our next session will begin at 2:45 this afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.